All right, let me start this party by introducing Justine Willis Toms. And I don't even know whether an introduction is necessary because I imagine most of the world knows who you are and what you've done. Today we're here on behalf of our nonprofit, and I'm with Patty Rosser, who's part of the board also, Evolving Health Education. And we have actually been gifted this in the 1990s, this nonprofit, by a woman named Vicki Rowe, who was the first post-secondary university in the state of California in the name of metaphysical and spiritual education. And so over the years and before she passed it on to me. And so with great honor, we're here today to continue this education journey. So with that, Justine, we want to start with you on my journey through the internet, and you populate it very well. Finding out who you are and what you do and how you do it and when you've done it. We would like to start off with The Candy Store of Consciousness by Chris Crosso, if I'm pronouncing that right, in 2011, because you are a candy store for sure that puts everybody in overwhelm. Where do you start with you? And so where we want to start is in Alabama with your grandfather.
Oh, how wonderful. Oh, thank you so much for throwing out that subject to me because it's so dear to my heart. And we are talking about an ancestral home in Alabama. I grew up on the North Shore of Chicago and in a very homogeneous atmosphere. In other words, everybody looked like everybody and we were all white, and it was mostly conservative, but I must say that my parents kind of were outliers and they were progressives. But anyway, in this community, it was all like, I kind of think of it like Stepford Wives. Everything was picket fence and everything looked so perfect. But underneath, there were other things going on that we as teenagers growing up and young people didn't understand or know about. However, I had the marvelous, I would say, privilege and honor that I had roots in the South, and we would spend, myself and my siblings, there were 4 of us all together, and my cousins, there were 5 cousins that were close to our same age, and then my younger cousins who actually lived in the South, my other cousins lived in Falls Church, Virginia. We would spend all of our summers, all of our Christmas vacation, all of our springtime, even sometimes part of the school year in Alabama, in the deep, deep, deep South. And this was in the 40s and 50s. And so I had the privilege of seeing another way of being, another society, another whole culture that my classmates did not have. And I grew up where there was a place where there were water fountains. Some would say colored and the others would say white. I grew up in this deeply segregated South where everything was, I would call, explicit. It was out there. We knew about it. Whereas what I've discovered years and years later, that exists everywhere, but it's not so explicit. And in fact, it's harder to detect. And we're just discovering that now in these times. Here we are, it's 2019, and we're just starting to unearth all of these biases and all of this phobias of all sorts. in our culture that exists, and now it's transparent, more transparent. Whereas I grew up with that, and I knew about that quite early on, and that was a grace. It also led me to be invited in the mid 1960s to when I got my teaching certificate and after I graduated from Auburn University. I became one of two white teachers in an all-black school in Sylacauga, Alabama. And so working in that early civil rights era as an educator. And that's also part of my whole background in the South and that home. But I must say that home was so nurturing to me. It was, we would be there all summer long, a tribe of kids. I mean, can you imagine 9 grandchildren living in the house and 3 grandchildren living across town, which would come in daily. All of us in this 7-bedroom Victorian house built on top of a hill by my great-grandfather, and right in the center of town. And it was amazing what my grandmother and grandfather did in those years to entertain us, to nurture us, to educate us, to hold them in their loving hearts. It gave me such a firm foundation upon which the rest of my life has been built.
That is beautiful. Tell us for a moment, because this is a historical monument or place. Tell us the name of it and a little bit of the things that will let people follow up on.
Oh, sure. This is when the family sold this after grandmother died. It was turned into a B&B, and in fact, at some point, it was featured on the cover of the bed and breakfast directory in the U.S. of the America's directory, and it's called Mistletoe Bough. And you can look it up on the internet, Mistletoe Bough, as a B&B. And then you see all sorts of pictures of all the bedrooms, and it had a gentleman's parlor, it had a ladies' parlor, it had a full dining room, it had a breakfast room that would fit all of the breakfast room is as big as the dining room, but and it had azaleas blooming and magnolias, and it just rhododendrons. I've written about grandmother's flower garden. She raised flowers just for the picking, and she and her women's group started the first let's say flower making competition in Alex City, and they would compete in flower arranging, and she always had flowers all over the house, and it was just another kind of gracious living and beauty. Papa was a banker. He wasn't. He inherited that from his father. So they started the Alexander City Bank, and I must say he was not a great banker, but but he was a great humanitarian. And when he died, as many Black people were at his funeral as white people, because he served that underserved population of like tenant farmers, and because he was just such a great humanitarian. And we all walked with him all over Tallapoosa and Coosa County, and he knew the county. He was actually a farmer by passion, and collector of rocks and arrowheads, and he would take us out into the country with him all the time in his many drives to visit these tenant farmers. So as kids, we would be playing in the yard under the pecan trees with, whether they were Black kids or white kids, we would be playing together in the yard while the grown-ups talked whatever they talked about, things that mattered.
So, Justine, how old were you at that time?
Well, I was born in 1942, so that went all the way, at that time I would have been, from birth on to, I don't know, it never ended, until grandmother died. And I pretty much, and after I graduated from Auburn, after I taught for some time, I moved to the West Coast. So I moved to the West Coast in 1967. So that went on all throughout 1942 to 1967. So through my 30s, the early 30s.
What a lovely beginning for you.
Yeah.
Grandparents are so vital. I mean,
I feel so fortunate in having such a great relationship, not only with my mother's parents, but also my father's parents. I really feel the children of today who have that kind of contact with their grandparents are enormously privileged in many ways, because there's a relationship there that is served by no other relationship. Our parents are worried about roof over our heads and teaching us manners and teaching us not to wet the bed or whatever it is, or to get along with each other. Grandparents, their only job is just to love us. And when we can have a relationship with those kinds of grandparents, I think it holds us well for the rest of our lives.
This speaks to me about something you wrote to us about grace and the meaning of grace, and what it feels like to me, as I take in your words, that you were born into grace and surrounded by grace in these surroundings that were so familiar to you that you're sharing with us. But then you met Michael, and I think he took, with all of both of your experiences in many different religions and churches, so you got to see grace from many different points of view, and then you met one another. And tell me how grace showed up then and continued in your life.
Great. Thank you for asking. That's the mythical beginnings of New Dimensions, was my meeting Michael. Someone pointed that out when I told this story. I think it was on the 25th anniversary of New Dimensions, founding of New Dimensions, and we were at a huge gathering, and many people showed up, and it was a whole week-long day of a week of gatherings with speakers and workshops and so forth. And I told this story, and it was Jim Fadiman who said, he told me, this is like your hero's myth. And I had never really looked at it that way until he reminded me or showed me that, this is. Because what happened was, for me, have been graced, and this is like that gift of the soul. I think we all have these gifts of soul that we're born with, and for me it's been a spiritual enthusiasm. That's one of the gifts of my soul, that I've always had a kind of enthusiasm for things of the spirit. And it always, in my early life, it took the form of following different religions. And I grew up Episcopalian. And then through various circumstances, when I was in my early 20s, I left the Episcopal Church because I had a disagreement about divorce, of all things. Remember, the Episcopal Church was based on King Henry VIII and all of his divorces. But anyway, I left the church, and at that time I'm in the South, and I'm married to my son's father, Donald, and he's grew up Southern Baptist, and his mother, Buna, wanted me to become Southern Baptist. So she would take me to all the churches, all the Southern Baptist churches around Alexander City, to see if there was one that I might like. Well, there was one I liked. It was Wayside Baptist Church. And I remember specifically what I loved about it was the music. And that's another one of my enthusiasms is music. And it was so different from the Episcopal Church, whose music is very staid and melodic. And then suddenly I'm in this place where the music is loud and raucous and moving my heart, and the choir is moving around and they're clapping and singing, and I was just enthralled, and I wanted to be part of that. So that's when I joined the Southern Baptists, and I was Southern Baptist for about probably 6 years or so. And then after that marriage dissolved and I moved to the West Coast with my son to be close to my mother and sister, I became, of all things, a Jehovah's Witness. And that was, at the time, it really appealed to me because they're very intellectual in their Bible study. And I was very much a part of looking at the Bible and what are the origins of the scripture and what is a historical account, and that's what they take into account. So when I met Michael, I was actually a practicing Jehovah's Witness. I always jumped in all feet first. I've been baptized many times. Maybe I'm assured of something in an afterlife because I've had so many dunkings, So anyway, I met Michael, and I wanted to get to know him better. We were vibing on all chords, except for the spiritual. I knew that was something I needed to talk to him about. So I told him one day that I wanted to come over and talk about spiritual things. And he invited me over, and of course I thought that I was going to convert him. That's what I had in mind. And so we went down into his little bedroom where he had turned into a library. It was floor to ceiling books of everything from Hinduism to Judaism, from Tarot to science of mind. It was all there. And I said, look, I don't want to talk about any of these things. I want to talk about the Bible. And in fact, I want to use my translation of the Bible. And the New World Translation, which is done by the Watchtower Association. And Michael said, oh, you mean this one? And he reached back, and unbeknownst to me, he had a whole shelf of Bibles, of different translations of the Bible, including mine. Now, remember, I came from a progressive background, and I saw that, and I remember thinking to myself, I'm wondering if he's being more inclusive than I am. And anyway, we grappled with scripture then all night long. I would read a scripture and I'd say, now this is what it means. And he would look at me and he'd say, well, yes, I see that. And you might look at it like this. Now, remember, this is 1972. Since then, there's this technique that we know that instead of saying both, we use both and instead of either or. It's a kind of technique that many of us use to think of being inclusive, to say both and instead of either or thinking. And but it was long before any of that was part of the culture. And he said, and you might look at it like this. And every time he said that, he expanded the territory of which we were speaking, and he put it in a broader context. And the more he did that, the more excited I got. And it took me a while to realize that it wasn't the dogma that I was going for. And going back to the earlier part of your question, Ronney, was, was that my spiritual enthusiasm was to find the deepest truth, the broadest truth on which to rest, to be found, to what is the foundation upon which I could rest myself and count on. And I continue to do that to this day, to look at that deep and broad truth upon which to rest and to hold me steady in the winds of life that blow and the challenges that come up before us. So that I never left. That was 9 months later, almost to the day, 9 months later, we incorporated New Dimensions. So in some way, that was the birth, that was the conception of New Dimensions. And ever since then, we continue to have microphones documenting and inviting other people into that conversation about what is the deepest truth, what is that foundation that holds us steady in the winds of change and challenges in our lives.
So the many decades that you've had with your radio and all the speakers that through that to help you go on this journey that you're already on, this spiritual journey. So are you closer to your realization that, okay, this is there, or it would, you're getting more information to assimilate?
Oh, good question, Patty. And I'm going to say it's beyond the information. I'm going to call it wisdom, because I think that what New Dimensions comes in touch with, and the kinds of people that we sit down with, that they're not giving more like, here are the 10 steps of self-help, and here's more information to put into your hopper. But it's like, here's some wisdom from my experience of life. And that's what we go for in New Dimensions, is our guests, their experience of life, rather than their 10 steps too. Although those steps can be informative and can be helpful, it's the living experience that I'm going for, that I resonate with, and I feel others resonate with, and so in that way have I discovered. I hope I keep expanding. I feel like it, I feel like it goes like rings of a tree, insofar as that it's a nature doesn't throw anything out. Everything, nature uses everything. And so a tree grows out from the center, and it makes a new ring and it encompasses everything that went before. And it just keeps growing and growing. And that's what I feel like is happening in my life, is that it's growing like the rings of a tree. And all of those are early things, working in an all-black school, being a Southern Baptist, being a Jehovah's Witness, all of those things, whatever they were, those are part of the story that makes me who I am today. And the wisdom I gained there is never lost. It's just added to and expanded. So that as I say, I'm always looking for a definition of God, and I know I've shared this with the two of you, but one of my most recent definitions of God, which is the most expansive one I've come up with so far, is that God is the quantum field of infinite intelligence, of divine energy, of which we are embedded. The dynamic force of energy that exists within everything, and from which everything is made. somehow it's kind of like the analogy for me. It's like as if God is like this vast ocean with no beginning and no end, no up or down. It's all this vast ocean, and we are waves in that ocean. So we're never separate, although we do have our identity. Each wave has its own curling, has its own breaking, has its own individuality, but it's really not separate. And that divine intelligence, that infinite intelligence, is both in us and all around us, and we can call on it at any time. So that's my current definition, and I can't say that that's going to be my last definition.
I
So,
think that one's amazing, but because it crossed all boundaries, it crossed all religious affiliations whatsoever. It speaks to the soul of who we are. It resonates at a higher level.
well, for me, it does, and I know one thing that I've learned and understood from my past experience of working with different religions. I so appreciate and understand what it means to want to feel like I'm standing in a truth, such as been precepts of some religion, and that I'm holding to that truth, and that I'm building fences around myself to hold me in that truth, because life can be so scary without fences and boundaries and without something firm to stand on. And it's much more scary to be out there where the horizon is boundless and everything is changing and shifting. So I understand the need for that and why it's important for people to function within their own personal need to either have certain truths set in stone for them, which I don't think is a bad thing, because if it offers them the opportunity to love more, to be more kind, to be a better parent, to be a better citizen, I say go for it, whatever works. So I'm not putting that down. I'm just saying it's not my path. My path can be difficult because it doesn't have so many fences, and then it gets confusing, and sometimes I get worried, and sometimes it causes anxiety, and then I have to find my spiritual practice that takes me back to that infinite intelligence that I'm embedded in, and to know that I'm not going to fall out of the universe.
Well, what I see you've done with your radio station is giving people an opportunity to see all the other aspects of what you've been talking about, to view themselves in another perspective. The younger generation, my daughter's 30, 2 months. So that millennials, in the technological world, they're immersed in that. They're not immersed in and not balanced at all with nature. And your radio station enables them to have information and crosses that boundary because you got that wisdom behind all your experiences with that radio station and your husband, what you've been able to accomplish with that. And what a gift for all of us to be able to share that information with you, or you to share that with us, so that we can expand our, for us. So thank you for that. And
you.
Because
Patty, may I just correct you on one thing? You call it a radio station.
Oh, sorry,
it's a radio series, series that airs on various stations. So, not to identify it as just one station, but it's a series, a radio series, series.
Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah.
Thank you. Sure. Yeah.
So having said all of that, which is beautiful and expansive and fun, you have interviewed people all over the universe. So we're talking the Dalai Lama and Buckminster Fuller and Joseph Campbell. I would guess from your writings that those are some of your top ones, but who else stands out, and what gifts did you exchange?
Oh, how wonderful. Thank you so much for that question. And it just reminds me, it's not the really famous peoples, I would say, that I hold so dear to me, but there are a few people that I truly, truly, that pop out to me in just thinking about that idea of who else besides these wonderful people, the Dalai Lama, Joseph Campbell, Bucky Fuller, Krishnamurti, all of these people, there are two people that pop out at me, and one is Terry Tempest Williams, and the other one is Robert Fuller. And Terry Tempest Williams is she's actually a writer about nature, a cultural observer. She's one of the most finest writers I've ever encountered. I was the first one to interview her on her book called Refuge, Refuge, An Unnatural History of Family and Place. That was her first book, which was written, I think, in 1991. And she grew up as a Mormon in Utah. And this book, I highly recommend this book. It was all about the great flooding of the Great Salt Lake when it flooded into all the wetlands around it and just inundated the landscape. And her description, being a kind of naturalist and citizens naturalist, let's say, she just made such marvelous observations about that. And then at the end of the book, she goes into there's a little essay about her being a tribe of one-breasted women because her ancestors lived downwind of the nuclear test sites. And so that breast cancer ran in her family and runs in her family. And since then, she's written many, many other books. One, let's say, Finding Beauty in a Broken World, is just, she's in Italy studying mosaics, and she goes to Rwanda and studies the women who collect the bones of those people, their children who have died in the genocide, and what they're doing there. And she does a one book. I can't remember the name of it. It might have been called Leap, but it was where she just went to a museum and looked at a painting and studied that painting for months. And it was the Garden of Earthly Delights and Heaven and Hell. And it just blows your mind. She would take binoculars and sit across from this painting and study this painting. She studied the prairie dogs of the prairies, and she was the one who described to me how they get up every morning and they put their little paws together and they face the rising sun in prayer. And she's so prolific in her observations. Her book on When Women Were Birds, about her mother and her mother's journals, is not to be missed. All right, you can hear me go on and on about Terry Tempest Williams, and I have the privilege of being able to sit down with her once again in December with her new book, which is called, what is it called? It's right here. Wait. Oh, it was right there. I pulled it off the shelf. Where is it? It's on my desk somewhere. Aha! Here it is. Here it is.
Oh.
Erosion, Essays of Understanding. And this is about climate and climate change. And I'm just so looking forward to delving into it because she's such a prolific and wonderful writer, but better, an observation of culture and who we are and place and home and what it means to be human. So that's, I highly recommend her. She's a loving, beautiful person. And then the other one is Robert Fuller. And Bob Fuller has been part of New Dimensions for over 40 years. He's been on the program many, many times. And he's a physicist by training. And he actually wrote a book on physics that is still being used as a textbook in different universities and colleges. He was at one time the president of Oberlin College. And what I love about Bob is that one of his books is something, it's called About Somebodies and Nobodies. And Bob really understands what it is to be a somebody in our culture, where where you make a phone call and everybody returns the call, you're important. And to be a nobody when he has no affiliation and he makes a call and nobody returns it. And he understands that the web and woof of being a somebody and a nobody. And his newest ideas, and he's a real seminal thinker. He was one of the ones who told Werner Erhard years ago that, you're doing good things with us, but why don't you do something to change the planet, like solve hunger, like world hunger? And out of that, the Hunger Project came. But like what you would call the rainmaker, the Chinese rainmaker, he's not acknowledged for these ideas that he has seeded out into the culture. Nobody knows his name, but one of the things that he has seeded into the culture is the dignitarian movement. And that is dignity for all, that he's gone to what is underneath racism, homophobia, all the different ageism, everything is what is underneath all of that is a lack of dignity. And so he's going to that base of what is our bias and where do we go wrong? And it's not offering dignity to the janitor as well as to the congressperson, whatever it is. So Bob is just a seminal thinker, and he continues to be. I just count both Bob and Terry deep friends, and I'm deeply honored to what I call walk the pilgrim path with them.
Wow.
I know, that's powerful.
Thanks for asking. I mean,
so I read the little excerpt that they call you the Socrates of radio. How do you feel about that?
Oh, let's see. Socrates. I was just reading something about Socrates and Plato, and Socrates never wrote anything, but Plato wrote about him. And yeah, the Socrates, I think Michael was called the Socrates of radio. I really respect Michael now that I've taken over the hosting of New Dimensions. I must say, I would produce for him, and I would be aware of all the material, and I would help guide him, and I would help do all sorts of things behind the scene, kind of like Bob Fuller. I was not acknowledged out front, but I have deep respect for how he was a speed reader. He could get the essence of someone's work really quickly. I have to labor at it. It's a much more in long-term project for me. I have to read a book. I'm a slow reader. I read every word. I often take maybe 30 pages of typewritten notes for every interview I do. So it's like doing a term paper every week. I never thought I would still be in school like I am. But I feel for me the blessing of my work is that I would be much, much too lazy to pick up these books. I mean, I think of the one I'm doing today. This is Jenny Odell, How to Do Nothing, Resisting the Attention Economy. And like right now, I'm on page, what, 128. I've got 75 more pages to go before Friday to do all my notes, and to then to look over my notes and see, okay, now what did I just read and what popped for me, and to review all of that. And I'm just finding already, I think that I have already probably 20 pages of notes. And I'm just getting so many, yes. And then I'm starting to see the cross-fertilization with other interviews I've done and other people I've been with. And I'm starting to realize, I want to use this in a talk that I'm going to give somewhere, or I want to use this in a piece of writing. It just all becomes integrated into my life as a whole. So it's not like I do interviews over here and they're not a part of my life. I'm so grateful. And that's a grace that it then becomes part of my being, and then hopefully leads me to act in good ways for the benefit of others.
That's beautiful. So, Justine, what we've done for the next segment of this is we've taken your 5 sections of your book and separated them a little. I hope we did a job that will be, honoring you, because every single story is precious. Everything has a gift and a lesson. And so I love the title, A Wider Landscape, How We See Ourselves in the World. So how can you put that together for us? Because I see where you've taken and taught us to be in the present moment, to pay attention to our tolerance for problems. I loved your unknotting our the knots that we seem to create in energy, and adapt to loss, and then turn these things into flexibility, kindness, and the game called Wonder. Wouldn't it be wonderful if?
Yes. Yes. Wouldn't it be wonderful if, one of the big gifts of being human, and we may not be the only species on the planet that have this gift, but we know for sure it is one of our gifts, and that's a gift of imagination. And I feel that everything follows imagination, that first, in creating anything, first it comes of the imagination. Anything, nothing is created out in the world until it's first imagined. Mm-hmm. And so the game, I wonder if, and I haven't reviewed this in a long time, but I'm assuming, or at least here's what I feel about it now. No matter what I wrote then, here's what I feel about it now. I hope it coincides with that article. Is that imagine what life would be like if I think of one of the people that I've interviewed several times is Jonathan Robinson, and he comes up. He has a little book of big questions. Mm. And I remember when he came up with a question of, if you had everything, and other people have come up with this question, if you had everything, if money was not, or health, or where you lived, or who you are, or your gender, or anything, or your background, anything, none of that mattered. It was, everything was available to you. There's nothing holding you back. What would you be doing? What would you be doing? And this gives you this freedom to wonder if no matter, my education didn't matter, anything mattered, I could do anything. What would I be doing? What would I truly be doing? And what I found for myself, and when I ask this of other people, if they truly go down to the bedrock of that, it's they usually come up with something that's not so selfish or self-centered or egocentric. It's usually something that is broad in its scope and helpful to others, and something with great meaning for culture and community and friendship and the planet. It's amazing what people come up with. And if we allow ourselves that, remembering everything is first born of imagination and then it's born into the world, then we have a touchstone, or we have a compass through which we can guide some of the decisions we make in our lives. And we're guided by that which we find we truly value. Because this kind of idea and this question gets down into what we value and what is truly important to us. So that's what I feel about holding the world in a wider vision. It's natural as human beings. That's a natural tendency. If we can just sort of put aside all of the pressures on us for earning a living and keeping a roof over our head and providing for our health care and all of that. If that were set aside, then what would we be doing?
So Justine, is the radio what you'd be doing, or would you change that now?
That's a great question. Thank you so much. I feel that I'm not sure if it's radio, but continuing to have these conversations with people I respect, I feel so graced by the opportunity to continue to have these conversations with people I respect, wisdom leaders, and who are still on the quest with me in looking for the biggest truth they can find and what contributes the best to our mutual livingness is what I would be doing. And I think this vehicle has provided a wonderful opportunity for me to continue to pursue it. I can't imagine when, retiring from it. I hope I'll do it till the day I pass off this mortal coil.
So are you saying this vehicle being the internet now, that we can expand to so many people, and maybe even this kind of video that we're doing today might be a new way for us to expand the whole program? And
may it be so, because I think that New Dimensions and these kinds of deep dialogues are a tremendous resource. I have been told that they are a tremendous resource, and we have, and it's deep. Our conversations are deep in their content, and we have over 1,500 programs that have been digitized and available to people. And I think in this day and time, and what I'm really working on these days is the idea of, I'm actually looking for an intern that can help me to navigate these platforms. And with the help of you and InnerViews and all that you're doing, Patty and Ronney, and your work to help partner me to be able to reach these people who may not even know about our existence. A lot of people say, oh, I love New Dimensions, but I haven't heard it in years. Are you still doing it? And so we're getting lost in the clutter of what Ginny Odell would call the attention economy. That all these different platforms that are vying for our eyeballs and eardrums to to choose me. And how do we stand out as something that is more than just a surface sort of fixative on things, but that is going deep and that provides true inspiration and stimulation for the imagination.
I don't personally see any other way other than collaboration. We have to unite. It just seems to me like it's our breath. It's our heartbeat. Collaboration is just, it's necessary for all of us, and everybody wins. Everybody wins in this platform, so it makes total sense to me. So thereby, and my goodness, I'm one little seed over here. And so what I mean by that is I looked around, book clubs are rampant, but I haven't seen what we're starting here, a book club with the author involved. So you can talk directly to the author page by page by page and get deeper into this deeper meaning. So doing this with you is just, it's a dream come true to me, and it makes so much sense to me.
Well, Ronney, I love collaborating with you. I mean, we've tried to collaborate with lots of different people through the years, as you can imagine. And then a few people really pop up that are authentic and true to their purpose and true to the idea of collaboration and true to the vision of seeding the world in a way that's a benefit to all. And I truly feel that is what you and Patty are doing here. I honor you in that way, and I feel most honored to be a part of the evolving education of the book club online course. I'm so honored, and and as you know, I like recommending others to you, and so we're beginning our true collaboration, and it's just so much fun and so exciting because we're so like-minded in so many ways, and and yet we're offering different facets of the jewel that we're all looking at. Yeah, so we're all different iterations, or we're all a different wave of the ocean we're swimming in.
Well, that little segment wasn't part of the interview that we set up to do, although I'm glad we have opened that door, and we will continue to keep that door open. So I'm just going to throw in one little caveat. We'll come back to that. That totally, to me, opens up your world of circles, which is all about collaboration. We'll go to that near the end of this, and then jump back in right now so we can kind of stay on target. And then, like I said, jump back in and go to animals and nature, your next section in your book, because it's beautiful, and I think it speaks to most people.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Yes, to speak beyond the human voices that so fill our lives. Language is so part of our lives, and to allow ourselves to sit in an environment without words, that are with our dogs and cats. And as I say, like, our dogs teach us about unconditional love, and our cats teach us how to self-care and take naps every day and go out in the sunshine. My cat is in the window right now, just kind of basking in the sunshine. And we can learn so much from the trees and just being with the trees. I have a tree outside of my apartment because I don't live in the country. I live in the middle of the city, but there is a tree that sheds its leaves in the wintertime and gets his foliage in the summer and gets full, and I speak to it, and I pay attention to it, and it talks back to me. And I remember when my mother was dying, and she was living with us in San Francisco at the time. And there was a moment when I was waiting for a bus on a street corner on Market Street, San Francisco. And I just suddenly became overcome with the grief of her dying. And there was this bush, just a bush kind of growing out of the sidewalk next to this bus stop. And I just turned my head into this bush and I just started sobbing into the leaves of this bush. And I felt it taking all of my grief and all of my pain. It could hold it, it could contain it. I felt so nurtured by this bush in San Francisco. That's just one little tiny example of nature and how it responds to us with such deep reciprocity and responsiveness. If we pay attention, it's there for us, and we must be there for it. So that's what I would say about animals and nature, just very briefly as teachers. I mean, many animals have been teachers in my life. I have one story I love, which was told to me by one of my deep friends, Diana Hart, about Sadie the goat. And that's in the book. I just love that story about how Sadie, she wouldn't give milk unless, she would give the milk, but she wouldn't leave the barn until the farmer hugged her and said, "Oh, Sadie, you did such a wonderful job." And it gave her an appreciation, and then she'd walk out of the barn. Otherwise, she'd refuse. She needed the gratitude, and she reminded him we must be gracious with each other with our compliments.
That's a great
Yes.
story. An awesome story.
Patty, I'm going to let you jump in 1 second, but I want to ask Justine something because I really want to honor your time. I know how valuable it is. We're coming close to an hour, and we do have a lot more. I don't know whether you have the time that you can graciously give us, or whether we want to close this up.
Are you speaking to me?
Yes.
I'm fine. I'm good.
Okay.
Okay.
So,
okay, Patty.
Well, you talk about circles and rituals. I love that part. How we can start our own circle. And I love some of your quotes throughout your book. Just wanted to say a couple before we go on that path of celebrations and rituals. Let your light shine. I love that. Love attracts love. Love is the path, the process, and the key. And of course, the one we started with, wouldn't it be wonderful? So I just had to bring that in because I loved that through your book. And I love quotes in general, but they resonated with me, and I wanted to tell you that. So, the circles, the sacred circles, there was a lot of information to grasp in all of that, of how to start circles and the benefit of circles. And we all know how important circles are. I mean, just sitting at a round table with people makes you communicate better because you're not sitting away from each other. You get to see all of the people in a circle. So it resonates with us. So could you explain with us the energy and the geometry, or a little bit about how what had the benefit of that, the circles and the rituals?
Well, yeah, and you've already mentioned, number one, we see one another. And it's not hierarchical. It's a circle. Everyone is on the same level. And that doesn't mean that they're not facilitators in the circle. Like one of my women's circle, which has been together for more than 35 years, we move facilitator around. We'll say, well, will you, Leah, take responsibility next time for coming up with a question we can focus on for our next meeting? So that person might take on that responsibility for that one meeting, but that moves around the circle. So in the circles that I'm part of, there's no one facilitator. So then there's not a tendency for everybody to start to depend on a single leader. Even if a person is the person who calls the circle into being in the first place, there must be a transfer of power at some point that other people take responsibility for hosting, we'll say, the circle. Like in my women's circle, we meet in different homes, and we each time one person who is hosting and who will set up an altar space with candles and whatever flowers or whatever they put in the center, and so they host, and then another person brings in the question or the focus of the circle that time, and then another person might bring in some snacks or something to eat for everybody, so that it's shared responsibility. And that for me is an important aspect of circles. And if it becomes just one person's responsibility, then I don't consider that a true circle, because people then become dependent, and then it becomes more limited in its scope, because it's only one person's viewpoint and one person's vision of how it should be. So I really encourage all participants to be part of the circle. So with that said, in also in the circles that I participate in, we always acknowledge a spiritual center. Now, not every circle needs to do that. That's just our preference, that we acknowledge the mystery of the unseen world that we're constantly surrounded by, and that which we feel we can tap into. So for us, what we do in the very early part of the circle, the first thing that we do in our circle is that we drum and rattle. That's the first thing. And one of the reasons we do that, and when I say drum, it's just like a steady beat, like just not a fancy drumming, but just a steady beat, or a rattle, steady beat. And one of the reasons we do that is to clear the air of words, that we're starting to connect on a different level of rhythm rather than words. And then after that, what we do is that we smudge. And there are many cultures all over the world that use smudge. That's not just a Native American sort of thing. It's used. The Catholic Church uses smudge. I mean, we can go on to all sorts of indigenous cultures and other cultures that use clearing of the air in some way. You can use a tone or a bell or something to kind of clear the air. And so we smudge each other. And in that way, it's not one person going around smudging everybody. We share it. We pass the smudge and we smudge each other. Then we light candles and we call in something. Everybody calls in some particular aspect. Like I met yesterday with my women's group, and someone called in peace and tranquility, and another one called in support for the people in Congress. It can be anything. Another person called in the health of the rivers, or called in rest. And so anyway, we call in, and then after that, then we pass a talking stick, and whoever has a talking stick is not to be interrupted. It's not a circle. It's not a therapy circle. We're not there to give each other advice. We're there to witness each other's lives. And that's where I like to bring in that African saying that is so important to me. And I'll read it because I don't have it all memorized, so I'm going to read it. And the African saying goes like this: a friend is someone who knows your song and sings it to you when you have forgotten it. Those who love you are not fooled by the mistakes you have made or dark images you hold about yourself. And that phrase is so important to me about circle work, because when you meet with the same people over a period of time, you get to see each other's genius, because we are all geniuses. Gene Houston will talk about that. Michael Meade talks about that. All sorts of people talk about that, that we are geniuses. And when we see people over a period of time, we see that in each other. And we're not fooled when we temporarily fall out of memory of our own genius. And this African saying goes on to say, they remember your beauty when you feel ugly, your wholeness when you are broken, your innocence when you feel guilty, and your purpose when you are confused. So I feel like this is really the essence of circles. And I've known in the circles I've participated in that when I am deeply witnessed, when I am deeply seen by another, I am transformed. Whatever anxiety I might be feeling, whatever unworthiness or shame I'm feeling, when I am truly witnessed, that is healed just by the mere act of being witnessed. Nobody has to say anything. So in that way, circles are just the most beneficial thing. And in this culture of extreme, one of the biggest maladies of this culture is loneliness. And this is an antidote to loneliness, that to develop friends of the heart that support us in our fullness. And that's what you're going for. And when people ask me, well, yeah, but how do I start a circle? I remember when I attended my first circle and I thought, I don't know how to do this. All these other women, they really have it down pat. They really know what they're doing. Oh my God, how am I going to do this? Well, I have set out 3 things that make it really easy, really easy. And the first thing to do is make the intention. Remember, I started off this whole thing about imagination. Imagine yourself having a circle of your own. So imagination, setting the intention. And I think it's important to write that intention down, because that's the first step in manifestation, is to actually put it in your journal and say, this is my intention. You'll find years later, I've done this, you'll find years and years later that when you have written down an intention without even knowing it, it comes to pass. Years later, you'll read that in your journal and you say, oh my goodness, I made that intention 3 years ago, and look, now I have this circle. I don't even know how it happened, but it happened. So write it down. That's number 1. Set the intention, write it down. Then 2 is put out the call. Just start talking to some friends. You don't have to talk to 15 friends. Talk to 1 other person, or maybe 2 other people. 3 of you is enough. Start it with 3 of you. Start it with 2 of you. But the third one, which is really important, is to set a time and do it regularly. Whatever you decide, keep to that commitment. And one of the caveats that I add to this that I think is really important is that when you set a time to meet, to stick to the time, stick to the opening time and the closing time, stick to the schedule. That even if in the circle, let's say we're going to meet once a month on a Tuesday night from 7 to 9. And if at 9 o'clock on that Tuesday night, things are so juicy and people are so excited, ring the bell and say, I'm sorry, the meeting's over. We will continue this next month. Because if you don't stop on time, then it just starts to morph into the idea when people are making that decision next time to come to say, oh, we went past 10 o'clock last time, and it took me so long to get home, and I was so tired, and I've had so much to do today and I just don't think I'm going to go this time. So, you just want to keep your commitments, and it's important to stick to that time, no matter how juicy it is. So those are my 3 criteria. Make the intention, write it down, make the call, even if it's only 1 or 2 people. Also, to add to that, if you show up on that Tuesday night and no one else showed up, have the meeting anyway. Have the meeting anyway. Meet with yourself. Keep the commitment. Stick to the time. And then afterwards, write to everyone and say, I had the best meeting. You missed the best meeting. Here's what happened for me. And write it all out and say, here's what happened to me. I was there and I met, although you weren't there and you were missed, but here's what happened for me. And boy, I'll tell you, that'll work every time. And you will learn something. You will have a great meeting, even if you meet just with yourself. So those are that's my criteria. I hope it's helpful.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Be an activist without driving yourself crazy. Boy, we need a lot of that currently.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. That's so important, because in this day and time, it seems like there's so much to do, and so much to discourage us, or so much to say, oh, I can't, what am I? I'm just a drop in the bucket. I can't make a difference. So it's really important to, and I can't remember who said this, but it's really, really important to me to work from where you are planted. So wherever you are, there is something you can do to make a difference. We all have our different areas of influence. It may be with our family. It may be with our neighbors. It may be with our children. It may be with our community, or it may be a much larger platform. It doesn't matter. Work with what's in front of you and what you have to work with. So do that, to start where you're planted, and know that you can't do everything, but do something. And this reminds me of something that I learned from Bucky Fuller, more than 40 years ago. And he introduced me to the concept of the trim tab factor. And in fact, on his headstone where he's buried, I think on Bear Island, Alpha, Maine, I believe is where he's buried, he said, just call me a trim tab, I think is on his headstone. And what it is a trim tab is, if you take an ocean-going boat or even an airplane, but we'll talk about a boat, and it's a big cruise ship, and that cruise ship is going through the water. In order to change direction or to turn that ship, there's no mechanical device on that ship that can turn that big rudder that runs down the back edge of that ship against the momentum of its direction. It would just break off. There's nothing mechanical that can work. So what engineers figured out was to put a trim tab on the rudder. And a trim tab is a very, very small rudder on the big rudder. And that small rudder is small enough that it can be turned. And when that turns, it begins to start the momentum to be able to start to turn the larger rudder, until finally the whole ship then is turning in a new direction. So what Bucky is trying to tell us, that each of us is a trim tab. We are that small rudder on the big rudder, and we can make a difference. We can change things. And I think it's important to not be daunted by the enormity of what excuse me, what we're asked to do. It's really important that, but we do something. And I'm thinking of Michael Toms, who talks about uh, hope is believing in spite of the evidence, which is a quote that's out there. But he adds to that, hope hope is believing in spite of the evidence and working to change the evidence. So it's being active in some way. But if we're just out in the world being active without taking care of ourselves in some deep spiritual practice and self-care and health and nutrition and sleep and all of those things, we're going to burn out. And then we're no use to anyone. So it's always a balance of the taking care of ourselves. It's like two wings of the bird. You can't fly without two wings. So taking care of ourselves on the one flap and then being active in the world on the other. Because if we're just taking care of ourselves and not being of use in the world, then we're just talking to ourselves in some cave. And so it may help us, but it doesn't give our life meaning. And I think that's what we're here for, is really what is meaningful to me and how can I serve? And, you know, it was Sir Lawrence Vanderpost who was talking about, you know, it's not about how we're all in pursuit of happiness, and it's not about happiness that's really going to make us feel good about our lives. It's really about what gives us meaning, what is meaningful. That's what really seeds our life in a very positive and rich way. So it's the pursuit of meaning, and having meaning in our life means contributing to others. Just think about it. When are we really outside of ourselves? When we're actually helping another person. It's just like times just stop in those moments. So I say that being an activist without driving yourself crazy is really, really important. And I just, may I say, just one little brief conversation. I know that there's an essay in my book about Tom Greenaway, who is one of the most dear people in my life, and he continues to be part of my life. I worked side by side with him for several decades. He's now retired, but he now lives in my community right next door. And it's so great to see him. And one thing that he did when he moved from San Francisco up to Ukiah, when we moved our operation up to Mendocino County from San Francisco, he moved up with us. And that was a big decision on his part. And one of the things that he would do is that he would go every week, he would go to the local city council meeting. And he went every single week. And he never said a word. He wasn't part of, some days there would be hundreds of people there talking about an issue, and they would each have 2 minutes to speak, at a city council meeting. If we've ever participated in one of those, people ranting and raving, we've got to do this or that. And Tommy never once took the microphone. He just sat in the back of the room. And sometimes he would be the only person there in the back of the room. And he never said a word. And finally, when he retired, people came to his retirement community from the city council meeting, and they said that because he was there, the decisions that they were making on that city council were better decisions because of his presence, his quiet presence. And they asked him, what were you doing when you were sitting there? And he said he was just sitting there loving them, just loving them and sending them encouragement to be the best people they could be. Wow. And he just did that silently. And it made a difference to all of us. Can you imagine the decisions they made because Tommy was there was better for the whole community because he was there. Now, there's an example when you think, I can't make a difference. Sitting week in and week out in a city council meeting made a difference.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
yeah.
So on to your last chapter or session, it's a segment, celebration and rituals. What a way to end a book. Or begin.
I love that too. I hope I have a copy of my book somewhere. Yes, here it is. One of my favorite quotes about celebration. Here it's. Michael and I spent many hours with William McDonough, who is an anticipatory design architect who lives in Charlottesville, Virginia. And he, one memorable afternoon, we were sitting on his front porch, and it had just rained, and it was springtime, and his little Tibetan terrier was running across the yard chasing squirrels, and flowers were blooming, and the dewdrops were shining off of trees, and it was just so beautiful. And Michael was mentioning Bucky Fuller, and Michael quoted Bucky as saying, "Form follows function."
Mm.
And I remember, now I'm going to read from my book because this is so poignant. Bill caught his breath in a rather pregnant pause, and Michael and I could see the wheels turning in his brain. And finally he said, "Form follows function. Function follows evolution. And evolution follows celebration." And I go on to write, it was obvious right there before our eyes. Spring was having a splendiferous party, and everyone was invited. Everywhere we looked, our eyes feasted on a dazzling beauty. It was obvious that life is all about celebration. Bill went on to say, and this is the quote, "It's not about survival of the fittest. It's about those who celebrate the most being the true evolutionary winners. Nature is all about fierce celebration." And that is in that particular little essay in the book, gives you a flavor. And it for me, to take time to celebrate, to look at what I've accomplished. We're always looking at all the tasks ahead and our to-do list. But stop for a moment. Take a breath and say, wow, I did that. I completed that. I crossed that off of my list. Yay, yay. Let me toast myself, pat myself on the back. Whatever it takes, take a moment out and celebrate. Celebrate with others. Celebrate by ourselves. Just remember to celebrate life. Life is a joy. We're not living in some sort of galactic penal colony. This may be, this may be a planet really for celebrating life. And so let's remember to do that and participate in that great act of celebration. So, yeah.
I would like to thank you, Justine, for creating this circle with the three of us today. So thank you for that, and for you and get to know you. So it's been a joy for me personally. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Patty. It's been my joy to meet you, and thank you for your great attention and your great questions and your great follow-up and your great being in part of this whole experiment together.
So I'm not quite done with you. I want a couple more things that I want to touch on. One, I would like to open up the possibility of another interview, or maybe we can call it something else, where we can continue this and send these kind of things out into the world. There's so much of you to share. who your mentors were and what your greatest passions are right now, and all the affiliates you have, and all the other things that you're associated with. I think those are important for people to know. So you don't have to commit in the moment, but I would like to plant the seed that we can open that door and leave it open, and keep this celebration going. That I think is really, really, really important. And then for Patty and I, what we want to leave with is that this is an open door for people to join our nonprofit in celebrating your book week by week, chapter by chapter, and letting people interact with you personally in all of these things that you're helping to teach us and expand in the world, to make us all better people and make this a better place.
Great. I love it. I love all those suggestions. I'm totally there for all of it. And if you want another session like this, I would be delighted. It was delightful to be with both of you. And so if you want to have another one, I'm open to that. And of course, yes, I'm looking forward to these their book club online courses. Yes. So absolutely. I'm looking forward to that and sharing this with a wider audience. So that's going to be wonderful. It's going to be marvelous for me, and I hope for all who join me.
Yeah. Okay, we'll get some kind of a schedule, maybe a regular one. I don't know what that time frame looks like, and we'll put the announcement out there and the date, and have people join us. And then we will also have available when your book club is starting, which will be soon, the 1st of November, if I remember off the top of my head.
Okay, something like that. I've got it in my calendar somewhere, so I'm assuming that's it.
Me too.
Perfect.
Good.
This has been such an honor. You are wow, you're somebody to reckon with.
Hey, we're all just muddling through here as we chop wood and carry water and as best we can.
Exactly.
Well, thank you for going over. And
Thank
I'm
you.
sure
Thank you.
a lot of our audience will be grateful for the time spent with you too.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity. Many blessings. Thank you.
To you too.
Big
Bye-bye.
hug. Big loving hug.
Yeah, big loving hugs. Yeah, thanks. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.